Latin is a language I now wish I had studied, for on the next world I found myself in the middle of an open-air market, surrounded by people speaking it. Inside the bazaar, people were lazily shopping and appeared not to have noticed my arrival. Around me were fruits, vegetables, books, electronic devices, and myriad other things for sale. A vast sea of people were examining and buying them. From what I remember, there wasn't any real organization to the place, just a random arrangement of wares for sale. It appeared that anything and everything was available for purchase. The atmosphere was frenzied and vibrant with color. My clothes set me apart from the crowd, and soon drew attention from the local police force. Although I didn't know for sure at the time that they were police, I assumed as much because they had matching robes with a bird of some sort stitched onto their breast. They didn't accost me, but merely began following me. I did my best to fit in, pretending to look at the goods for sale, but the subterfuge did not work in the least. Everyone around me wore brightly colored robes of reds, whites, blues, and purples. My clothing alone was dark and subdued. Also, my footwear was decidedly different. Sandals seemed to be the fashion choice of the realm, and my combat boots brought stares and questioning glances from those around me. Attempting to act casual, I made my way out of the market, continuing around another mile, and then turned onto a cross street. The further I got from the market, the fewer people there were on the street. Away from the sea of humanity, I was able to discern that the buildings were of modern construction, with a design closely resembling Mediterranean. The road was slightly wider than a normal city street, with ornate lampposts every eighth of a mile or so. As I continued my stroll, I occasionally looked back, hoping the people from the market were no longer following me. Every time I did, I was disappointed to see that they had not given up their slow-speed pursuit of me. As I walked, I realized that once again I was in a foreign land, unable to speak the language, and with nowhere to go. During my ambling, I saw several entrances for a subway system, but when I tried to enter, I was not able to get any further than the doors at the bottom of the stairs. The inhabitants of this city were able to open them by some means I did not see. They simply opened for them, but not for me. Unable to gain access to public transportation, I continued my trek on foot. The policemen from the market were still walking behind me, doing their best not to alarm me. They continued to shadow me for another mile or so until I came upon a park with a beautiful fountain and several cement benches. Tired of walking and bored with drawn-out cat and mouse games, I decided to test my luck. I simply sat down and stared at my stalkers. By my estimation, they were either going to do something or not. After a brief staring match, one of the group, a woman, walked up to me, smiled, and then sat next to me on the bench. On her robe was the same bird symbol as the men who had been following me, but her symbol had a circle around it. I would later learn that this was a form of rank insignia. She said some things to me in Latin, which of course I didn't understand. I guessed by her inflection that she was asking me a question. Having no clue what she was saying, I simply shrugged and looked down at my feet. I wanted nothing more than for her to go away and leave me alone with my thoughts. Alas, she did not. More Latin from her and more shrugs from me. This conversation was going nowhere, and it showed no signs of stopping. Nudging my boot with her sandal-clad foot, she continued her litany of Latin. Her sandals were different, and the straps wrapped halfway up her shapely calves. "Look, lady, I'd love to have you rub up against me all day normally, but could you just leave me alone?" I finally said to her as I made a shooing motion with my hands. From inside her robe, she produced a shiny black pyramid, which she held close to my head. With her other, she motioned for me to continue speaking. I don't remember what I said, but it was a short narrative about her associates following me and my desire to simply be left alone. My tale of woe was interrupted by a chime from her little pyramid. At this sound, she abruptly stood up and faced me, holding her device between us. When she spoke to me again, the device caused her words to be translated into English and hover in light above it. Totally amazed at what I was seeing, the text was clearly asking me my name. In parentheses, after the question were the words stern and polite. What followed was the strangest communication I have ever had in my life. I told her my name, and it was translated and written into the air in 1/4-inch letters, but in reverse so that it appeared to her to be in the correct direction. It is truly a remarkable device. If you don't believe me, check my backpack and try it out. Simply hold it near the head of the person you wish to speak with and get them to talk. Elia, that's who I took it from and who I'm writing about now, told me that it scans a person's brain, maps the speech center, then contextually scans the center of the brain which holds the written language, but I'm going off track here. Through using this device, it's called an oblix, she was able to tell me that she was concerned about my safety since I obviously wasn't from the area. I told her she was right and that I was lost. When she asked me where I was trying to get to, I told her home. She asked me where home was, and when I told her it was on another world, she didn't bat an eye. Instead, she asked me if I wanted her to take me to the port so I could go home. When I laughed and said yes, she told me that she would need to take me first to the police station where she would check to see if I was under, I believe the term she used was civil restraint. If I was not a fugitive, she continued, then I would be escorted to the port and sent on my way. At this point, I thought she believed me insane and was merely indulging my delusions to get me to follow her without incident. I asked her if we could get some food on the way, and she laughed, saying, through the oblix, that she didn't date vagrants. Apparently, I didn't look to her like someone who could pay her back. Elia had a wonderful sense of humor. It instantly put me at ease, but also evoked an emotion in me that, as a married man, I should have guarded myself against. Instead of restraining my feelings, I flirted with her, offering to pay for the meal with the most amazing story she'd ever hear. I stressed that all of it was true. She told me that she would have to hear the story first, then motioned for me to follow her. That is when she told me her full name, Lieutenant Elia Alaris. Just writing her name in this journal makes my heart ache anew. It is tempting for me just to omit the rest of the story and write about Dallas, which is where I am currently sitting. That, however, would be a lie of omission, and I've resolved to make this account as true and accurate as possible. With some semblance of trust established, I walked with her a short way to a raised concrete platform about 10 feet by 10 feet. She waved her hand above it and said something out loud. She wasn't holding the oblix up, so I have no idea what the words meant. Another marvel of Elia's world then appeared. From the sky above, a black capsule descended. It was roughly egg-shaped, with a flat bottom, and held 6 seats. Its doors opened by sliding backwards silently. The machine had no visible means of power or lift production, and I was so busy studying it that I forgot all about my police escort. She had to nudge me to take my seat. Amazingly, when seated and looking outside, the entire craft was transparent. I took the opportunity to ask Elia about the machine's workings. When I was able to, I wrote down as much of this information as I could. You will find detailed notes in the green notebook on page 83. I hadn't been airborne since I started jumping from world to world, and it felt good to be up again. The ride to the police station was short but enlightening. From the air, her world looked remarkably different than mine. This was a coastal city, and ships could be seen moving into and away from the port. But they looked like no ocean-going vessels I have ever seen. They produced no wake. Instead, the water seemed to simply move out of the way. The streets leading into and out of the city were perfectly straight, no bends or curves, just perfect right angles. We were not the only ones in the sky either. I was able to see hundreds of transport aircraft, some large, some tiny, buzzing around the city just as silently as we were. Appearing as a horde of gnats, it was a bit unnerving. I wonder if they were all pilotless like the one I was sitting in. Abruptly, we stopped our forward motion, hovering for just a moment before beginning a rapid descent straight down. I should like to point out that during our plunge I felt absolutely no sensation of movement, like being in a simulator with the motion turned off. Settling on a platform similar to the one we had departed from, the doors opened and we stepped out into a much different environment. Gone were the ubiquitous robes, replaced by more normal clothing. Well, normal in the sense that it no longer looked like I was attending a brightly colored robe enthusiast convention. The styles were quite different from those on my world, but still recognizable were pants and skirts and shirts and such. The police station was on top of a hill in a commercial district. All around me, people were going about their daily business. Occasionally, one of the transports would descend to its concrete landing pad and then rocket straight up into the sky. Ascending the few steps to her station, I motioned for her that I needed to use the oblix again. When she produced it, I told her I had a gun in my backpack and that, where I come from, trying to take one into a police station was a major offense. Elias smiled from ear to ear, laughed, and then said or typed or whatever, "Are you sure you didn't forget it?" Not knowing what was so funny, I told her that I was sure it was there and that I didn't want to break any laws. She just laughed at me and grabbed my arm to lead me into the station. Inside, she shed her robe, revealing a shapely body clad in military-style shirt and a skirt which ended just above where her robe had been. She hung her robe on a coat rack just inside the door, and rather than proceeding into the main waiting area, she led me through a side door which took us to what appeared to be office spaces. Around us, men and women wearing military-style clothing were busy attending to what I can assume were administrative tasks. At the very back of the room was an office with the name Alaris painted in silver on the door. Inside the office was an ornately carved desk, 2 chairs on either side of the desk, and a large window facing the ocean. Forcefully, Elias shoved me into one of the chairs and then took her seat between the window and desk facing me. Out came the oblix. "Are you a fugitive from any civil restraint here or on any planet governed by the Empire?" "No," I replied. I should have been more shocked by the second half of that query, but after hopping from world to world, being chased by a nightmare creature straight from the pits of hell, it didn't shock me at all. With that, she produced what looked like a pen, which she pointed at my face. From the top of her desk, a small, paper-thin piece of metal rose. I guess it was a computer monitor of some type because she spent some time looking at it and tapping it with her pseudo-pen. Through the oblix, she continued, "Well, the good news is you're not lying. You are not a fugitive. The bad news is you are not a citizen of the Empire, which means you are on Earth illegally." I stared at those words hanging in the air above her desk and felt frustrated. Was it like this on every world? Would I be doomed to wander with no hope of ever having a home or country again? I felt like I was back at the marshal's prison. As I pondered this, a policeman walked in and deposited a clear bag on her desk, then stood by the door. Inside it was the pistol Don Cruck had given me, the combat knife, the wallet and map from New Arlington, and these journals. At some point during my initial conversation with Elia, her cohorts must have taken them from my bag. I then understood why she had thought it so funny of me to alert her of the gun's presence. "What can you tell me about these?" came her next question. "The gun and ammunition were given to me moments before I appeared in the market. The knife I've had for a few months or so, and the journals detail the amazing story I alluded to earlier." "Appeared?" "Materialized, landed. I don't know how to describe it, really. This last time was the first time I was conscious for the event. Normally, I am crippled by so much pain I pass out. One second I'm here, the next I'm somewhere else." Now, it was her turn to stare at the floating text. She read it at least 3 times before she calmly opened the bag and examined each item in detail, starting with the knife, which she took from the scabbard and turned over and over until she was satisfied that it was indeed just a knife. Then she directed her attention to the pistol. Though I am certain she had never seen a weapon like it, She was quickly able to determine how to remove the magazine and work the slide, ejecting the cartridge from the chamber. Next, she turned to the map of New Arlington. "And this?" she asked, with an eyebrow raised. "A map of a city on another world," I replied. "Are you from there?" she wanted to know. "No," I replied. "Look, it would just be easier if you read my journals. I've written everything down except for the last few days' events. Clearly, you have the ability to translate it. So why don't you, and then just read them? If you do, then you will know everything you need to know about me. You will also know what you need to be afraid of, and it is not me." "Perhaps," she replied, "or perhaps you are playing at an angle I don't yet understand." She said this through the obelisks, and with that she removed it from the desk and began a rapid conversation with the man at the door. Her subordinate took me to a holding cell where I was made to sit for hours. It was a repeat of the marshal's prison, although the guards didn't beat me and there was air conditioning. That night, I was awakened by Elia. She told me that she was inclined to believe me for no other reason than the log of events in my journals and the supporting items in my bag would have to have been either an incredibly elaborate hoax or the truth. After spending some time with me in the park and during my interrogation, she did not believe I had the mental ability to fabricate something on such a grand scale, including a new language. I was a little angered at her assessment of my mental ability, but simultaneously happy to have her believe me. She also told me that I had been charged with espionage by a non-citizen, which was punishable by death, and the likely outcome would be a quick trial and an even quicker death. Apparently, the location I had arrived in was a sacred area, and entry by non-citizens was strictly forbidden. Then she told me that the only way to prove my innocence to others, and thus avoid execution, was to capture and kill the animal which was chasing me. To that end, she had decided to arrange for me to escape. When I asked her why she was willing to risk helping me, her answer was compelling. On her world, justice is the supreme guiding principle of government. She could not allow an innocent man to be killed, even if it meant risking her own safety. She had taken an oath to uphold the tenets and spirit of justice in all her dealings when she became a police officer. Since then, she had never once turned her back on her fundamental responsibility, and it had been the reason she had been successful in her chosen profession. In her world, justice was both swift and fair. It was above sacred. After her explanation, she returned my backpack, in which she had assured me my possessions had been returned, and told me to follow her. I expected her to be questioned by her co-workers regarding me being out of lockup as we left the station. The guards merely saluted her and went about their business. Apparently, Lieutenant Alaris was considered above reproach, so they didn't even think to ask her where she was taking me or why I had my things back. In fact, she walked at a slower than normal pace, which made me increasingly nervous with each policeman we passed. I was surprised when I found we had returned to her office, where she proceeded to pick up a duffel bag and deposited a large golden coin emblazoned with an eagle on the desk. I wanted to ask her what the business with the coin had been about, but I didn't have the ability to. Perhaps it was a symbol to one of her co-workers, or a message to someone. I just don't know. Outside the station, we called for another transport, which arrived in short order. Before entering, however, she went to the rear of the vehicle, opened a panel, and removed a red disc-shaped object, which she threw to the floor, shattering it. Once inside, she told me that the disc was a tracking unit which she had disabled, and thus assured that there would be no record of the transport's movements. When I asked her how she knew to do that, she simply replied that she had not always been a police officer. In the air, we discussed her plan. A friend of hers had an uncle who was in the shipping business, who was currently off-world. Yeah, I mean another planet. For at least another year. This uncle had a large tract of land where he stored shipping containers. Using these containers and on this land, she planned to lure the beast into a trap. I was excited because I thought the plan was well thought out and had a great chance of success, except for the part about trapping it. To do it right, she needed to kill it before it dissolved away as it had done in the lab. This is something she was not aware of because the journals she had read did not include my last day there. I also shared with her my belief that weapons such as my gun were of limited use, but that fire might prove effective. I told her how it still bore the scar from my assault with the fire poker, but not from the numerous times it had been shot. Concerned that burning up all the evidence would invalidate the plan to exonerate me, she was reticent. I suggested that she record the entire event, thereby creating a larger body of evidence for its existence. I also added that I doubted that even if we engulfed the beast in fire, that it would be totally consumed. The strategic planning continued for at least an hour while we made our way through the sky, and when we arrived at her friend's uncle's home, we were both worn out. The home was more of a palace than a dwelling, 3 stories high with white walls and topped with red tile in the same fashion as most of the buildings I had seen. The structure itself encircled a central garden which was at least a half-acre in size. The home was reminiscent of an opulent Spanish villa. Richly appointed and immaculately kept, the home sported huge tapestries, fine wooden furniture, and an array of electronic gadgets that kept the home running well. Alaya told me there was a central computer which monitored everything from water levels and quality in the cistern to the temperature in each room. It adjusted according to preset routines. If the pantry ran low on an item, a signal was sent to the local merchant who would load it on a transport and ship it to the home, where it would be unloaded by a service unit. The service units were tripedal robots which stood approximately 4 feet high but could extend their height up to 9 feet to accommodate all cleaning and maintenance tasks. They had 2 mechanical arms with 4 finger-like projections. With all this fancy equipment, I was sure that the owner or caretaker would know we were there and call the police. Alaya assured me that she had notified the owner of her intent to use this home and land, and that no alarm would be raised. After a quick tour of the house, she took me to what would be our room. Surely, I protested, in the entirety of the house there must have been another room available, so that we might both have our privacy. Alaya then informed me that just because she had taken me from jail did not release her from her obligation as my jailer. I would stay in the same room with her, thus assuring that I did not try to escape in the night. The alternative would be sleeping while shackled to a support beam in the hall just outside. I was nervous about this, but considering the alternative she suggested, I decided to share a room with her without further complaint. From within her duffel bag, she produced a length of steel cable, wrapped it around the support beam in the center of the room, and then using a device which looked like a stapler, caused the loop end to fuse with the other part of the cable. Then she motioned for me to come closer. When I did, she looped the other end around my left ankle and fused it closed as well. When I asked why she thought she needed to do this, she ignored me and went into the bathroom, closing the door behind her. Then I heard running water. She had decided to take a shower, but not take the risk of me running. Angry at being shackled like a dog, I sat down and opened my backpack to get my pistol. There was about to be a change of leadership around here, and if she thought I was going to put up with this kind of treatment, she was sorely mistaken. At the bottom of my bag, I found the gun, but also found that it had been disabled by her threading a similar steel cable through the barrel and out the chamber. How cute, I thought. Everything had indeed been put back in the bag, but she neglected to tell me that something extra had been added. I was really starting to dislike Alaya, and as I sat there pondering my perpetual incarceration at the hands of others, a loud boom shook the house. It sounded like a shotgun followed by a roar. I raced to the window to see what could be making such a noise, forgetting I was tethered to the post, and fell hard into the mosaic tile floor. A lengthy stream of curse words erupted from my mouth, and as I tried to get up, I felt a wet foot push me back down to the floor, followed by the angry sounds of Latin. What my ears heard was something like man-ear, which meant nothing at all to me. But the foot grinding between my shoulder blades provided all the translation I needed. I held my hands up so that she would see I was complying, and when I did so, I was quickly turned onto my back, where I saw an extremely beautiful, sopping wet, and very angry woman pointing what was no doubt some sort of weapon at my head. It looked like a tri-barrel shotgun. I couldn't help but notice every time she screamed at me, her breasts shook. I wanted to close my eyes so as to protect her dignity, but I didn't. Keeping the weapon pointed at me, she slowly moved to her duffel bag and produced the oblix. "The next time you try to escape, I will kill you." In parentheses, it said firm, angry, threatening. I told her what happened, and after examining the chain around my ankle and the post to which it was affixed, she pressed the barrel of her weapon against my neck as she stood directly over me and looked out the window. After a brief chuckle, she then went back to the bathroom and wrapped a towel around herself. She had left the oblix out and shouted to me, "That was just a ship entering our atmosphere. This house is very near the spaceport. You will see and hear them frequently. Like I said, her uncle is in the shipping business, so his home is near the port." Substantiating her claim, the sound repeated itself as another ship arrived. Angrily, I hefted myself into the chair next to a writing desk. When she emerged from the bathroom, she had changed into a loose-fitting purple dress, obviously designed for sleeping comfort. Without a word, she left the room and returned a short while later with a plate full of meat, fruit, and also a framed picture of a massive spaceship. "Now you've told me your fantastic story, so I owe you dinner," she said as she put the plate in front of me. Then she held the picture up and pointed to the ship, which was docked somewhere in what looked like a desert. It must have been a mile long, but in the foreground were a group of people. Though she was pointing at the ship, my gaze drifted to the people, where I found a familiar face. "This is the kind of ship you heard. They travel across the empire buying and selling goods. This one is the New Horizon. It is one of the ships that my friend's uncle owns." "And how long were you a member of its crew?" I asked. "I knew I should have covered my face," she replied. "For 4 years." "This is how you met your friend?" I asked. "Yes, I was an engineer's apprentice under her," she replied. I asked her if she would tell me of the places she had been, and she promised to do so in the morning. She said she was too tired, and indicated that I should finish my dinner, which, of course, I did. At the conclusion of my meal, I was tossed a pillow and a blanket. When I voiced my displeasure at the thought of sleeping on a tile floor, she asked if I would be more comfortable hog-tied but in a bed. I rolled my eyes, and she turned out the lights. I hope she enjoyed my snoring. I know I enjoyed making no effort to stop it. In the morning, we set about constructing our demon trap on the sprawling property. Using some of the hundreds of shipping containers, which very much resembled the kind we have on our world, and a crane, we created a long alleyway which was closed at one end. Then we set others on top running 90 degrees in orientation to create a roof, and finally we left one suspended over an opening in the roof near the closed end. There was just enough room so that when a switch was thrown inside the crane, the container would fall, hopefully crushing my pursuer. With only one way in and one way out, it seemed like a good plan. Then we worked out a method of communication to use without the aid of the oblix. I taught her to say the numbers 1 through 10, with each one having a different meaning. 1 meant that she was in her position. 2 meant that I was in my position. 3 meant the beast was almost in position. And 4 meant to drop the container. 5 was the signal for something being wrong, and the remaining numbers were locations to meet as fallback positions if something did go wrong. Alaya provided 2 small transceivers through which we could communicate with each other at the appointed time. They were tiny, fitting in the ear canal and becoming almost invisible, but had a very long range. She claimed that on the ship she had shown me, one person could be at the bow and another at the stern and still hear each other with no interference at all. For the next few days, we practiced our coded communications and simply existed. She told me of her travels, and I told her what I could remember of my home world. Every day I would think that we had built our trust, but every night I would find myself chained to the post for the evening. Then, one night, something very strange happened. She woke me up, untied my leg, and pulled me into bed with her. She wrapped my arms around her and fell asleep. There was nothing sexual about it. I was still fully clothed, but I held her through the night, and in the morning she refused to speak of it, so I didn't press the issue. This same thing happened for the next 3 nights with the same coldness in the morning. I'm afraid I was starting to develop feelings for her, so I stopped communicating. I would only use 1 or 2 words to answer her, and she was smart enough to not be offended. You see, even though I don't remember much of my wife, I know she exists. I know I have children, and she is their mother. I also know that I'm not the kind of man to take liberties with another woman. I think she may have been in a similar situation, but we didn't discuss it, and the following night she didn't pull me into her bed. Instead, she just cried. I wanted to reach out to her, but I feared that if I did, I would cross a line from which there is no turning back. As a result, this strange sexual tension, punctuated by coldness, fomented between us. I was attracted to her, and she knew it. I'm certain that she was attracted to me, but we both just ignored the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Eventually, she restored my pistol to working order, and from that moment on, I kept it and my backpack with me at all times. I suppose she discerned that I was not planning on trying to escape, but there may have been something more to her decision. By doing so, she effectively gave up her control over me, making the two of us partners and not just warden and inmate. It should come as no surprise that eventually I began to hear the noises in my head again. I warned Elia what that meant, and she understood. It was almost a relief when I smelled the approach of my hunter, for it meant that there was a chance to salvage her career and end this battle in one fell swoop. Perhaps I would not merely abandon her to the consequences of helping me. Maybe if I killed the animal, I would be transported home. The evening of my final night in what I have begun to call the villa, we were eating dinner when the putrid stench of its approach wafted into my nose. Elia smelled it too, and looked at me at once for confirmation that it was on its way. And we both quickly left the table to execute our plan. And with the smell growing stronger, we knew that all our planning and scheming were going to be put to the test. Elia was the first to reach her position, climbing into the crane and signaling me through the small transceiver in my ear that she was there. 1, she sounded out of breath. I scurried as quickly as I could through the long corridor, sliding into position and lighting the pile of firewood we had left there in the event of a night arrival such as this. 2, I yelled as I quickly retrieved the pistol from my backpack. Okay, Richard, came her voice. She had learned a few English words and how to approximately pronounce my name. This time, when she said it, I could tell she was worried. 3, she screamed as the beast neared our snare. Then followed a string of almost non-stop frightened Latin. She must have seen it for the first time then. The smell was thick as it approached the mouth of the trap. Standing between the fire and it, I could see that it had yet again grown. Its back stood almost 10 feet tall now, its snarling maw dripping with that vile black saliva. At the entrance to our deadfall trap, it hesitated, then opened its mouth. Firelight glinted off the 3 eyes in the back of its throat. As it began walking toward me, it kept its mouth open. Drawing nearer, I could see that all 3 of its internal eyes were fixed upon me. I took several steps backward and placed the fire between it and I. 3, I said quietly under my breath, trying to stay calm as the monster crept slowly towards me. I dropped to one knee to steady my aim, then targeted the eye in the center of its mouth. Abruptly, it stopped just before reaching the edge of the kill zone. I squeezed off a round, and I am proud to write that it hit its mark. The lamb's eye disintegrated as the beast reared up in pain. When it did so, its head hit the top of our trap, causing it to jolt out of place. When it recovered, it kept its mouth closed and examined the tunnel with its external eyes, sweeping its head around the walls. Wanting to encourage it to keep advancing, I fired twice more, but the effect was almost nothing. The shots did hit, but the animal didn't even flinch. Finally, it began its slow walk towards me again. I emptied the magazine and tried to reload, but dropped the fresh magazine on the ground. When I looked up, the creature was standing squarely where Elia had planned its demise. "For, Elia! For!" I cried out. A loud metal clang echoed just a moment before the container dropped. The beast looked up and must have known it was doomed, because it started to howl at me just before it was crushed beneath the heavy metal box. The resulting fetor and fetid blood which exploded all around left no question in my mind as to if it had survived or not. The beast was dead. I felt safe at last. "Richard!" came Elia's voice in my earpiece. "I'm okay," I yelled back. She then raised the container which had crushed my pursuer. Firelight illuminated thick tendrils of flesh and blood pulverized and pounded into the dirt. Happily, I walked through it as I exited the trap. Elia ran to me, and I to her. We embraced, and I'm ashamed to say we kissed passionately before remembering ourselves. That night I was surprised that she still demanded I sleep shackled and on the floor, but I was too happy to complain like I normally did. I expected her to go through her evening routine and then get in bed. Instead, she took from her duffel bag a thin piece of metal, which I could guess was some sort of communication device. She went into the bathroom and started speaking Latin. I surreptitiously turned the oblix on and kept it below the bed so that if she came out of the bathroom, she could not see that I was listening in. Again, my expectations were not fulfilled. I was sure that she was calling her supervisor to clear her name and have them come look at the evidence. Instead, what she said was quite shocking, and I am no longer easily shocked. She told whoever she was talking to that I was an authentic displacement and that the follower had been neutralized. In the morning, she would deliver me to the council for further study. There was no need for concern because I trusted her completely. They had to move quickly, though, because there was a strong field beginning to emanate, and I would be displacing in less than 16 hours. She did not anticipate the length of time to neutralize the follower, and so she did not bring the required device to tether me to their world and create a bridge to mine. She requested that there be a tethering unit at the council chambers to prevent my escape. No, she didn't think I would be helpful at all. Too much memory loss. Liquidating me after the bridging was the best option. I was ashamed of myself for ever even thinking about having feelings for her. This is the reward a man gets for trusting a woman without his last name. This entire time I thought she had been helping me, and what she had been doing was taking me to a place far away from collateral damage so they could kill the beast and capture me. In hindsight, there is some consolation in knowing that I am not the first person to suffer this perpetual wandering. I don't know what a bridge to my world would have been, but I didn't like the sound of it. I had heard enough, and so I put the oblix in my backpack and reloaded my pistol. Moving to a position at the far reach of my tether, I pointed my gun at the bathroom door and waited. When it opened, she at first did not notice me and so walked toward the bed, but then froze when she saw me. I hesitated for just a moment, wanting to demand answers, for her to explain that what I had heard, or rather read, had been a misunderstanding. When I saw that her gaze had moved to her weapon, which was just out of her reach, I pulled the trigger. I shot her in the forehead, and she collapsed with a spray of crimson from the back of her head. Please understand that I could have changed this part. I could have lied in this journal and claimed that the beast ate her, but for the sake of truth, to myself and others, I did not. This is my confession to cold, premeditated murder. I killed Lieutenant Elia Alaris. I could try to justify it, reason it away, but it would make no difference in the final tally. I expected by now to feel some sort of guilt over having done so, but I don't. Not in the least. After murdering her, I turned my pistol on the restraint, thus releasing myself. I searched the room and found the device she had used to fuse and unfuse the cable. After a short time of playing with it, I was able to determine its method of operation and release the remaining half of cable around my ankle. I then set about packing my things and eating my fill of food from the kitchen. I have heard that killers like to take souvenirs. I guess I'm no different. I found the framed picture of her and her shipmates and stuffed it into my bag. You'll find that picture stuck between the last page and the back cover of the Green Journal. Having everything packed and still in shock over what I had just done, I set out into the night. As I passed the trap, I stepped inside to take one last look at that pile of festering ooze that had been my constant nemesis. When I had walked through it, exiting the trap, I didn't notice what I now saw was missing. Bones. There was not one bone to be found in that mess of goo. Also, the smell had subsided. I had a sinking feeling I had not seen the last of it. Elias should have listened to me. We should have immolated it, but we didn't. With the ringing of my ears as my only companion, I started walking at a brisk pace toward the spaceport. It was something I very much wanted to see before I shifted again. The hilly terrain between the port and the villa slowed me considerably. Night gave way to dawn and dawn to daylight as I approached a wire fence encircling the port. The ringing was reaching a fevered pitch now, and I knew I was not long of that world. There, at the edge of the fence, I saw a massive ship, roughly rectangular, rising with a pale blue glow on its underside. It moved silently until it disappeared in a streak of red light, followed by a boom which shook the earth around me. It was beautiful. When I turned around, I saw 8 men moving down the hill I had just descended. All but one carried a 3-barreled weapon like Aaliyah had wielded. When they noticed I was looking at them, they began running straight towards me. The only unarmed member of the party was carrying what looked like a large mechanical squid. That must have been the tether Lieutenant Ilarius had talked about. The pain in my head was almost to its maximum, and the last thought I had on that world was that they were too late. With every last bit of strength I could muster, I gave them the bird.